If somebody wants to collect them, great. I'm happy to convert that into a check and send it off. Thank you. So Hachaim. Yeah. So I'll be blessed with long life. So I'm gonna tell you a story that doesn't necessarily have so much to do with the Beit Midrash specifically, but just happened to happen to me. Specifically. And since I live in the Beit Midrash, I figured this counts. So I knew let's put it this way. I had a vague idea that we might be moving out today. I thought maybe we would get a big donor this last week. Maybe there'd be a knock on tomorrow's door.
It could still happen.
It could still happen. The night is young. I'll be here all night. Really, I will. And so, in any case, last weekend, a group of us, some of us from the Beit Midrash, Ellie Green, myself, Satya, a few other people, Ramona, Reuben, decided to go up to the Yuba River to go camping for Shabbos. And I thought to myself, this is really what I need. Just a chance to just rest and restore myself and just be quiet, nothing heavy, just a simple Shabbos in the woods, just to relax before the big transition that's we're now in the midst of right now. So I drove up there with Satya and got there Erev Shabbos and met Sticky and Ramona and Julie Seltzer and quickly set up Shabbos camp at the campsite. And very quickly Shabbos was upon us. Now, as I mentioned, I had gone there to have a restorative Shabbos, a peaceful, quiet time in the woods. It took us about 4 hours to get there. And what we didn't realize was that the people who were staying in the campsite next to us were about 22 years old. There was about 15 of them. They were from the inner city, and they had come there to have a birthday party with their subwoofers and their amps and their gangster rap and kegs and bottles of alcohol, and it was loud. I mean, this is like you've driven all the way into Yosemite and suddenly you're at a rock concert. And you can't do anything about it. Why? Because it's Shabbos. You can't ask them to turn things down. You can't ask them to move, and you can't move either. And the interesting thing is, it also happens to be Rosh Chodesh, which means there's no moonlight, because there's no moon. So, the only thing that we had lighting up our area were some Shabbos candles that we lit on the table before Shabbos, so that we could see our food. But within a few minutes into the dinner, one of the group was having some drinks. One of us were making l'chaims, and the liquor spilled over the candles. So now it's totally in the dark. We can't see what food it is we're taking. There's all sorts of, going on like 15 feet away. And these tall pines, and it's very dark. So we made it through the meal, and, we thought maybe we'll try to stumble, in the dark back to our tents. We didn't have much light, and because we had to set up at the last minute, we got not the best campsite. It was a slope, so all of our tents were on a very sharp incline. So as soon as you got in your tent, you sort of rolled down to the edge of the tent, and this kind of hung there, happening in the next campsite. And, to say the least, it was very hard to fall asleep. I tried, I davened, I tried to forgive, I tried to let go, I tried to let God, I tried to be present, I tried to, all these things. It's Elul, and this is a kapara. Finally around 2:30 in the morning, maybe 3, I just gave up, but I got up, and I realized everybody else was up too. So whenever I was talking with Ramona, And she's like, so what's been happening with you recently? I was like, well, actually, I just was in New York last week for a simcha, for a wedding. So New York is a wonderful place. They've got the great thing about New York, as many of you know, they've got fantastic kosher restaurants. And so many different types. It's not just one place where it's a deli. There are actual restaurants where you sit down, and there's waiters and maitre d's, and it was Mochi Shabbat, and my dad decided, let's go out for dinner. And so I told Ramona, she's like, where do you go? I said, well, we went to this wonderful tapas place. It was called Ladino, and they served, South American cuisine. It was just, and I'd never had tapas food before, but it was amazing. She said, really? They have that there? And I was like, yeah, it was under the OU. She's like, under the OU? And I was like, yeah, it was under the OU. All the waiters had ties that had the OU on it. And she said, did they wear anything else? I said, yeah, they wore other things. They wore other things. And she said, you went there with your dad? I was like, I went there with my dad. And she's like, that's amazing. And I said, well, yeah, they had like music there, and they had food being made. And she said, were there people who were there? Were they wearing their kippot? And I was like, yeah, people were wearing their kippot. It was like a from place. She's like, and were there women there? And I said, yeah, there were women there. She said, working there? I said, well, mainly in the kitchen. She said, so it was mainly the men who were out there? Just, and I was like, yeah, and you were there with your dad? I said, yeah. She's like, God, Sticky never told me there was a topless kosher restaurant on the Upper West Side. I can't believe this. Under the OU. And you went there with your dad. So, needless to say, we were laughing hilariously because I suddenly realized why she wanted to know if the waiters were wearing anything more than ties. And why other people were wearing their kippot there. And just as we were finding ourselves cracking up, a fight broke out in the campsite next to us. I don't mean like, hey man, you took my tent. I mean a fight, like violent people beating each other, men beating each other, women beating each other. It was like a grand royale in the middle of the forest. Like, welcome to nature. Chodesh Tov, my friend. Chodesh Tov. And we're sitting there, sort of doing our little Jewish thing, Kumbaya, my Lord, Kumbaya, soon by you, soon by you. And as this is happening, and we're sort of standing there at awe, we hear thunder, and we see lightning in the distance. And I'm not kidding you. And I said, Ramona, there's going to be a thunderstorm. I said, oh, no, it's August in California. It's a dry electric thunderstorm. They happen all the time. That's why you see a lot of forest fires. It doesn't rain in California in August. I mean, especially August up here, So I said, okay, fine. So we're sort of sitting there and trying to figure out, do we do something about the fight next door or whatever? Meanwhile, Julie Selcher suddenly yells to us, put a cover on your tent. It's going to rain. And Ramona says, it's not going to rain. It's not going to rain. It's not going to rain. I think it's raining. So next thing you know, it's thundering, it's lightning, and it's not just raining, it's pouring. It's pouring, and because nobody was able to get their fly thing over the tent, everybody crammed into my tent. A tent for one person with 5 people on Rosh Chodesh Elul. We're trying to be as sneeze as we can. There's people battling each other 15 feet away in the campground. We can't call the police because there's no cell phone reception. We're in the middle of the forest. This is Wonderland. This is nourishment. Or maybe this is Nourishkeit. So anyway, we sort of, we just sang songs, and eventually they went to sleep. And the next day, we davened. It was a beautiful Hallel. We had a beautiful Shabbos. And come out of Shabbos, the second day of Rosh Chodesh, and now I'm feeling, you know what? That was last month. This is the new month. This is the second day. This is really Rosh Chodesh Elul. So we went out, and we lay on the ground, and we looked up at the stars. Beautiful. And the campground next to us was quiet. some sort of peace had overtaken them. And, yes, some sort of dark greens wonderment had sort of, calmed the inflammation down. And, Satya had got in touch with her hippie roots and was beginning to quote Peter, Paul, and Mary. So we eventually fell asleep, and in the morning I wake up and it's time to pack. I had to get back to Berkeley. I had to pack. We were going to be moving in a week. I had things to do. And I couldn't find my keys. So I went looking around for my car keys, and I have this thing with keys, this novelist. The week before I had left them in New York, and somebody had FedExed them out here. So I couldn't find my keys, and I went walking around, and eventually I saw them lying on the ground where we had laid the night before to watch the stars. And they had been run over. Now, normally with a key, that's not such a big deal, but I happen to have a BMW. It turns out that inside a BMW key is a little crystal that tells the car, this is your key, and it can start. So I was able to open the car, pack it all up, thinking everything was fine, and just as I was about to leave, I turned it, only to discover it didn't work. It wouldn't start. Now, you might remember we have no cell phone reception up there, and so I wasn't sure what we were going to do. Here I was in the middle of the forest, I have no cell phone reception, my car doesn't work, I need to get back to Berkeley. So we managed to flag down the Bureau of Land Management Emergency Vehicle. This is an interesting guy named Brian. He used to work up in Oregon. He'd been involved in busting marijuana cartels in the forest. He had all sorts of interesting stories. He drove me about 10 miles outside of the campground, where I finally got cell phone reception and was able to call AAA, who sent in a special emergency vehicle that could traverse these mountainous roads. 9 hours later, I managed to get back to Berkeley. Of course, I'd had to leave my car in Sacramento because my AAA coverage only gave me 100 miles of towing. So I had to rent a car in Sacramento from the airport, not from a rental car agency, because it was Sunday, and the only rental car agencies open on Sunday are at the airport. So I had to take a taxi cab with an Indian man who proceeded to tell us a long story about how he had lost all of his money and hated America and had been stuck here for 20 years, and he didn't know how he was going to get out. That taxi ride cost me $65 and a lot of inner serenity. I got to the car rental agency, and I told the car rental person, what I'd been through, and he took both his hands, he put them across the desk and shook my hand. He said, I'm not just saying this because I'm renting you a car. I'm really sorry for you. I am really sorry for you. And I thought, somehow that wasn't as comforting as I'd hoped it to be. So, in any case, I drove the rental car back to Berkeley. And the next day, I called AAA to have them tow my car the rest of the way from Sacramento. But it turns out, if you want your car towed by Sacramento, you have to be present at the car to show them your ID. So I had to drive all the way back to Sacramento BMW, show him my ID for about 3 minutes before he would take it. Which was just a long enough time for him to say, what happened to your front bumper? I said, what do you mean what happened to my front bumper? He said, didn't the guy who told you yesterday just put the little clip back on the front bumper where he put the tow hook? I said, no. He said, God, I always tell those guys, they gotta remember to put that clip back on the front bumper or it's gonna get lost. So if you look at the front of my car, you'll see a clear hole right through the front of the bumper. I don't know where that piece of plastic is. Perhaps it's in Shemaim. But eventually I got my car back, I got my keys back, and now I'm back here just in time to say farewell and good night to the Beit Midrash. And I want to thank you all for coming out here tonight and supporting the Beit Midrash, really, and yourselves, because you are the Beit Midrash. And I want to invite my brother Saul for one last song before we call it a night. Saul?
I might be a blues singer, but he's really got the blues. Noah, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I'll say.
Okay. We have a short